The afternoon sun slanted through the towering glass panels of Langston International Airport, casting long golden streaks across the polished floors. A low hum filled the terminal, rolling suitcases, clipped announcements, quiet conversations broken by the occasional child's laughter. But near gate C9, where the first-class line coiled like a patient serpent, the air felt sharper, eyes lingered longer, smiles stiffened. Clara Monroe stood at the end of that line, calm and composed. 52, with silver-gray curls brushed neatly away from her temple. She wore a navy pantsuit with a subtle pinstripe and carried a black leather briefcase worn at the edges. She looked like someone who belonged, not just in first class, but in any room she entered. And yet, belonging had never been the question. It was permission that always seemed up for debate. Ahead of her, a younger white woman in a bright cashmere wrap tossed a glance over her shoulder. Then another. The second look lingered longer, eyes scanning Clara up and down with faint disdain. Her name, as Clara would soon learn, was Margaret Ellis, and her diamond earrings sparkled under the terminal lights with the kind of assurance only inherited wealth could afford. The tension wasn't loud. It whispered through stares, through the unnecessary adjustment of bags, through the way Margaret clutched her boarding pass as though guarding more than a seat. When the first-class agent called next, Margaret didn't move. She turned instead. "I'm sorry," she said, voice honeyed but cold. "Are you sure you're in the right line?" Clara looked up. Her voice was steady. "Yes," Margaret smiled tightly. This is the first-class priority lane, for ticketed passengers, not—" She hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Not upgrades." Clara didn't flinch. "I'm aware. I booked my seat a month ago." Before Margaret could respond, a man in a Navy TSA uniform appeared nearby. Officer Brandon Pike, tall, stocky, with a face weathered by authority and impatience. He was approaching from the adjacent security zone, but quickly clocked the scene. "Ma'am," he said, turning toward Clara, "is there a problem here?" Margaret seized the moment. "I think this woman may be in the wrong area. She's been watching people's bags and, I don't know, acting a little off." Clara blinked, a pause, as if trying to translate a language she'd heard too many times before. Officer Pike narrowed his eyes. "Do you have ID, ma'am?" "I do," Clara said, voice smooth as a page turning. She reached into her handbag with deliberate calm, extracting both her boarding pass and her government-issued ID card. But Pike didn't glance at the credentials. Not yet. Another officer arrived. Officer Darren Lowe, younger, restless, one hand already resting near the latch of his belt holster. He looked Clara over as if profiling were a reflex, not a conscious act. "What's your business here?" Lowe asked sharply. Clara turned to him. "I'm here to catch a flight. Business or personal? I'm returning from a judicial conference in Denver." Pike took the ID then, finally reading it, and hesitated. Lowe didn't. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the line." "For what reason?" Clara asked, her voice still unshaken but now laced with a thread of steel. "We received a report. That's reason enough for now." The terminal quieted around them. Conversations slowed. Phones lowered. People were watching, but no one intervened. Clara looked directly at Pike. "Is that how this works? Oh, a glance, a light, and suddenly I'm suspicious?" Pike looked unsure, but Lowe stepped forward. "Either step aside or we'll escort you. Now." Clara stared at him. Then, slowly, silently, she stepped out of line. And in that moment, the balance shifted. Because no one, not Margaret, not Pike, not Lowe, knew what Clara Monroe's ID truly said. Chief Justice, State Supreme Court. Clara Monroe followed the officers in silence, her heels tapping evenly against the floor, each step echoing a little too loudly in the suddenly watchful corridor. Terminal sounds faded behind her, replaced by the cold stillness of authority misused. People parted to let them pass. No one asked why. Officer Lowe walked a step ahead, his shoulders stiff, chest slightly puffed as if parading a captured threat. Behind him, Officer Pike seemed less certain now. He kept glancing down at Clara's ID as if something about it itched at the edge of comprehension. They entered a narrow administrative corridor marked TSA Security Access Only. A heavy gray door closed behind them with a soft, definitive thud. Inside the holding room, Clara remained standing. A worn metal bench sat beneath a flickering fluorescent light. No windows, no dignity. Lowe leaned on the metal desk and began writing something on a clipboard. Name? Clara raised an eyebrow. It's on the ID you're holding. Answer the question. Clara Monroe. Occupation? She tilted her head. You still haven't read the card. He stared at her, jaw tight. Humor me. Chief Justice, Supreme Court of... Of what? He interrupted. TV courtroom reruns? A small, sardonic smile pulled at the corner of Clara's mouth. It was not amusement. It was memory. The kind of restrained grin someone gives when they've seen the same script so many times it's no longer worth reacting to. Officer Pike cut in, speaking for the first time since they entered. Darren, maybe we should verify she was loitering in a high-security terminal, possibly impersonating someone with clearance, Lowe snapped. You want to explain that to the command? Pike paused. But she gave us ID. And it looks suspicious, Lowe replied, his voice rising. I've seen fakes cleaner than this. Pike glanced toward Clara. We can call it in, just to confirm. Clara spoke, quiet but resonant. Perhaps call the state marshal's office. Or the governor's liaison. They'll confirm faster than your command. Lowe turned on her finger. Do not issue orders in here. You're in custody for interfering with security protocol and providing false identification. Clara's voice was calm. Are you certain that's what you want to put in writing? A tense silence hung. Pike checked the ID again. This time he read beyond the name, to the title, the seal, the embedded hologram. He blinked. Wait! Lowe wasn't listening. You people always think you can walk around like you own the place. Clara's voice dropped an octave. Not in fear, but in history. I do not walk to be seen. I walk because I have spent 3 decades fighting to make sure women like me are allowed to stand here at all. The door opened. A supervisor entered. Diana Wu, a middle-aged TSA director, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. She carried a tablet in one hand and confusion on her face. Which one of you detained Clara Monroe? Pike froze. Lowe stepped forward. I did. There was a complaint about loitering and suspicious behavior. She refused to identify herself properly. Diana held up the tablet. She didn't refuse. She gave you her government ID. Lowe looked bewildered. You verified it? I did. Diana turned to Clara, and her tone shifted entirely. Professional, measured, almost apologetic. Your Honor, my sincerest apologies. We're notifying the airport director now. Pike paled. Lowe opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Clara simply asked, Am I still in custody? No, ma'am, Diana said immediately. You're free to go, and I'll ensure this is documented for internal review. Lowe, still stunned, stepped back as if gravity itself had betrayed him. Clara stepped toward the door, then paused. She turned. To Pike, she said nothing. But her gaze was heavy with the weight of recognition, that he had known better and still failed to act. To Lowe, she offered only 5 words. You should have read the card. And then she walked out. By the time Clara Monroe re-entered the main terminal, the late afternoon light had begun its slow descent into amber. A soft glow spilled across the polished floors, catching the eyes of bystanders now whispering along the gate windows. Word had traveled, not because someone announced it, but because silence has a way of crumbling under the weight of injustice when seen. Clara walked with poise, her steps even, her posture undisturbed. But behind her, in the TSA control corridor, a different energy was brewing. One of panic, scrambled calls, and unspoken dread. Officer Pike stood frozen, watching Director Diana Wu tap furiously on her tablet, sending rapid communications at a Homeland Security's regional command. Her voice was low but cutting. "We just illegally detained the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. Her ID was dismissed, she was mocked, and at least one officer verbally degraded her under probable racial bias. You understand the implications?" She didn't wait for a response. In the corner, Officer Darren Lowe sat hunched forward in a metal chair, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were bloodless. He wasn't breathing through his nose anymore, just through his mouth, small, panicked inhales. He had just arrested a woman with federal authority exceeding his comprehension. She didn't, she didn't say it like that, Lowe mumbled, eyes darting. She never said she was a judge. I mean, not clearly. She didn't have to, Diana snapped. It was printed on her ID twice. She could have been lying. Then why didn't you run the ID through our system before cursing at her in a federal holding room? Lowe had no answer. Across the terminal, Clara reached the airline's first-class lounge, where the staff, now informed, greeted her like returning royalty. Apologies tumbled from their mouths. A private escort was already waiting, but Clara waved it all off. "I just want to board the flight I paid for," she said simply. "No escort, no noise, it does." But there was noise. It followed her like a tidal wave held back by glass. Passengers murmured. A few filmed her discreetly. One woman whispered, "That's her, the judge they tried to arrest." A child asked their mother, why did they stop her if she didn't do anything wrong? The mother didn't answer. Back in the administrative wing, Pike stood before a live video call. His supervisor, a federal oversight liaison, and the internal affairs deputy for airport security all present. Their faces were expressionless. "I'm placing you both on immediate suspension," the supervisor said flatly. "Officer Lowe, expect formal review for termination pending civil litigation." Lowe muttered, "I didn't touch her." "You didn't have to," the internal affairs agent replied. "You degraded a sitting chief justice with racially charged rhetoric and detained her without cause. That's enough for everyone to lose." Pike tried to interrupt. "I didn't stop it, but I didn't escalate." "You watched," came the answer, "and you knew better." Silence filled the room. Then came the knock. A man in a black suit entered, credentials visible, expression unreadable. U.S. Marshals. "Justice Monroe's office has requested full documentation of her detention," he said. "I'm here to collect footage, transcripts, and officer reports. You'll comply, or I'll escalate this to the circuit court directly." No one objected. Back at gate C9, Clara stood near the boarding lane. She didn't look angry. She didn't look rattled. She looked tired. A quiet tired, the kind that came from decades of maneuvering spaces where dignity had to be worn like armor, polished daily against erosion. As her boarding group was called, Clara turned one last time. Her eyes scanned the terminal, not in search of confrontation, but in acknowledgement of those who had watched and done nothing. And then, softly, she said to no one in particular, "It's never about who we are. It's about who they assume we can't be." And she disappeared down the jet bridge. The next morning, the headlines struck like lightning bolts across the country. State Chief Justice illegally detained at airport by TSA officers, federal investigation underway. Video surfaces of racial profiling, incident involving top judge Clara Monroe. Justice Monroe breaks silence. The badge should never be a mirror for bias. The story had leaked not through press releases or official statements, but through the crowd. Witnesses who had filmed parts of the confrontation. One video, taken by a teenage bystander, showed Clara calmly reciting her name and rank while Officer Lowe smirked. The clip ended with Clara being led away in handcuffs, shoulders back, gaze level. Within hours, the video had been viewed over 12 million times. By noon, every major news outlet had picked it up. Panels debated the implications. Legal experts dissected the unlawful detainment. Civil rights leaders called for resignations. But the most chilling response came from Clara Monroe herself. She issued a written statement. No press conference, no camera lights. I was not surprised, only saddened. I have worn the robe of justice for 23 years, and still in silence, I carry the same danger as any black woman mistaken for less. This is not about me. It is about the system that was willing to humiliate me because it did not pause long enough to wonder who I might be. The statement was calm, but it hit harder than fury ever could. That afternoon, the consequences arrived. Officer Darren Lowe was formally terminated from federal service, with multiple charges recommended to the Department of Justice, including unlawful detainment under color of law, verbal racial harassment, failure to verify identification during a security stop. Officer Brandon Pike, though not the instigator, was suspended indefinitely without pay, cited for failure to intervene, and professional negligence. Margaret Ellis, the woman who had made the false complaint, was swiftly identified online by digital sleuths. Her employer, a high-profile real estate firm, released a short and definitive statement. Ms. Ellis's actions are not reflective of our values. She is no longer employed with us, effective immediately. She later issued a half-hearted apology through her lawyer, claiming she felt nervous and misinterpreted the situation. But public opinion was already decided. Her name trended beside the word privilege. Within government offices, pressure surged. Governor's aides held emergency meetings with judicial ethics boards. The U.S. Marshal's Office launched a multi-agency review of airport detainment policies. Civil rights attorneys began preparing a class action suit for similar incidents, some involving names no one had ever bothered to remember. But they would now. Justice Clara Monroe, meanwhile, declined most interview requests. She returned to her chambers, held 2 appellate hearings, and signed 3 decisions, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Behind closed doors, she met with a coalition of legal scholars and equity officers to draft what would become the Monroe Protocol, a new federal mandate requiring mandatory cross-bias de-escalation training for all federal transportation security personnel. No dramatics, no threats, just systemic reform written in ink. In the quiet of her office, Clara kept only one photo on her desk, a black and white image of her grandmother, standing outside a small courthouse in Alabama in 1963, holding a protest sign that read, "Justice wears no color." And beneath that, Bowie in Clara's handwriting, "But the eyes that seek it often do." 3 months later, the morning air in Washington, D.C. carried a rare stillness. Soft sunlight stretched over the white stone steps of the National Judicial Conference Hall, where a modest but historic event was set to unfold. No red carpets, no orchestra, just a simple podium flanked by 2 flags, one for the United States, the other for the National Association of Federal Judges. Rows of guests took their seats, lawmakers, jurists, law students, journalists, and quietly among them, survivors of state violence. Ordinary citizens who had once been mistaken for threats. In the front row, an empty seat bore a bronze plaque that read, "Reserved for the ones they never believed." At precisely 9 o'clock a.m., Justice Clara Monroe stepped onto the stage. She wore no robe today, no jewelry, just a navy dress suit and a single silver pin. The scales of justice, inverted, not broken, only rebalanced. She stood before the microphone, glanced once at the crowd, and waited a full 5 seconds before speaking. Her voice was gentle but clear. "We are told justice is blind, but too often she has been blindfolded by assumption, not principle. I was not the first. I will not be the last. But today, We change what happens after the silence. A pause. I was detained not because I broke a law, but because I fit a bias. A woman walking. A black woman waiting. My credentials did not matter until someone needed them to. This is not about me being a judge. This is about how many others would not have been heard because they were not one. Gasps flickered through the room, not because the words were harsh, but because they were spoken with grace that made them undeniable. Justice Monroe continued, today, with the support of bipartisan leaders, legal associations, and civil rights councils, we are enacting the Monroe Protocol, a binding federal requirement for all transportation security agents. Mandatory cross-bias training. Body cam footage is audited every 72 hours. Third-party civilian review boards at all major airports, a public complaint system tied directly to judicial oversight. She let that land, not with applause, but with silence. Respectful, heavy, real. Then she said, this is not retribution. This is architecture. Because when dignity is denied at the gate, justice must begin before the courtroom. A standing ovation followed, not thunderous but sincere. Some clapped with tears in their eyes. Others simply stood, hands folded, heads bowed. Even the most cynical reporters did not interrupt with questions. Justice Monroe stepped back from the podium, nodded once and turned to descend the stairs. And just before she left, a boy in the audience, perhaps 12, stood and asked aloud, what would you say to them now, the ones who stopped you? Clara paused. The room fell still again. She turned back, her eyes calm. Nothing. I already did. I walked past them. Then she smiled, a small, tired, radiant smile, and exited through the side door. Epilogue. The lesson. In the weeks that followed, the Monroe Protocol was ratified in 28 states, with federal rollout on track for the following year. Officer Lowe's name became a cautionary tale in law enforcement academies. Margaret Ellis disappeared from public view. But Clara Monroe did not vanish. She returned to the bench. She continued making decisions. She never granted another interview. But each spring in law schools across the country, her story was taught, not as an anomaly, but as a turning point, and etched into a marble wall in Langston International Airport where it all began. A new inscription now reads, dignity does not ask to be believed, it asks only to be seen. And beneath it, Justice Clara Monroe.